All right, ladies and gentlemen, happy Tuesday to everybody out there in Navigator Nation. Hope you're having a great day. It is right now a pretty nice day here in the greater Kalamazoo area, although we are expected to get some of our first big thunderstorms of the year later on this afternoon. So that's kind of a big thing to look forward to, I suppose. Trying a couple of new things today here on Breathe TV House Call, COPD Navigator House Call. For those of you who might be new to this experience, my name is Mike Hess. I am a respiratory therapist and COPD educator, navigator, and advocate for many years now. My job is to bring you in the COPD community the information you need to be the optimal managers of your own condition. Also like to support my fellow respiratory therapists in getting them information they need, caregivers, physicians, nurses, social work, anybody who has an interest in the COPD community is, of course, welcome to join in our Facebook group called COPD Navigator. Follow our channel, COPD Navigator, on YouTube. Today, we're trying something a little bit different. You'll see me maybe peek off to the side a little bit more than usual because we are also live on Twitter. On that one, it's you can go to either the COPD Navigator Twitter feed, subscribe to me there, or my own, which is at Mucophile. You can look for Mike Hess and find me there also. So what we're doing today, this is a time for you guys to give us your questions, give us what's on your mind, things that are, of course, what I call the elephant in the room, the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19. It's going by a lot of different names right now, technical names, common names, all that sort of thing. But we all know we're talking about the old coronavirus that's out there right now, the pandemic that is, of course, on everybody's mind. I hope everybody on the front lines dealing with that is staying as safe as possible. And I hope those of you who have been affected by that in one way or another, whether it's simply by a lockdown or if you've known somebody who's going through that, I hope that your needs are taken care of as well. However, we also know that all these chronic lung conditions like COPD, like our friends in the asthma community, cystic fibrosis, all these things are still going on right now. And the pandemic situation is preventing access to a lot of the normal resources like pulmonary rehab, primary care offices, and that sort of thing. So please feel free, drop a comment, drop a question, drop a suggestion. Whatever it is that's on your mind right now, tell me a good story, a success story that you've had over the last few days. Like I said, this has been a beautiful day in the neighborhood in my neck of the woods. So like to hear those stories and provide some of that social aspect that a lot of folks get from pulmonary rehab and those kind of things that's also absent right now. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started. My respiratory shirt of the day, I've gone back to my good friend Bob Sapkowiak, who runs a coalition called COPD Breathe Strong America. We have a local branch here in Michigan. Bob is another respiratory therapist who's been doing some fantastic work mobilizing the COPD community, and again providing workshops and printed material and all those sort of things. So Bob, if you're out there watching, if you catch this later on, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your efforts, and I appreciate everything that you all do for the COPD community. While we're waiting for some of those questions to pop in here, I also like to say hello to my good friend Diane, another fellow respiratory therapist. Hope you're staying safe over a little bit east of here toward the Battle Creek area. And of course, Jim and Mary Nelson. Jim and Mary have been fantastic supporters both of the COPD community and of COPD Navigator for many years now. Very much appreciate their support and encouragement as I have discovered more and more about COPD. I tell people a lot that I have learned more as a clinician from our group than I think I've taught, and that I learned about COPD through many years of other experience. So I hope that I can give out a fraction of the information that I have learned. So let's see. We're just gonna take a moment, and once we got some of those thank yous out of the way, I'm just looking at see how some of these other things work here. I do actually have a couple of things that I want to, and it looks like Need to make a slight adjustment to how I sit here. Trying to be a little bit more cautious. Haven't quite figured out how to loop in the, like I said, I'm trying this new Twitter thing today. I haven't quite figured out how to loop in that angle with everything else that's going on. Every day is a new learning experience, so I appreciate everybody bearing with me today. I did want to cover a couple of things that I have come across in the last few days and maybe get your guys' thoughts on them. The first one came through yesterday, and I thought I had it pulled up, but I need to pull it up again. This was something that was done by another longtime supporter of Navigator Nation and COPD advocate, somebody living with COPD himself, and a comrade on the U.S. COPD Coalition by the name of John Linnell. I wanted to share a piece of work that he did. Again, I'm taking no credit for that. This is all John's work. You can access it on his page. It looks like it's set globally. Also, I believe it's through. We can get to it through the what's called the efforts list. I can't remember exactly what it all stands for. Emphysema. I should probably. Jim and Mary, if you're still with us, I know you probably have that information right at hand. They've also been involved with that for a very long time. So John created this document advising with some advice from the perspective of somebody living with COPD on sheltering in place. Of course, with this whole coronavirus crisis, we're seeing a lot of folks talking about sheltering in place, quarantine, isolation, physical distancing, all of these things coming together. So it's got a couple of great tips, and it mentions that his initial thought a few weeks ago was telling people, welcome to my world. Of course, people living with COPD have any chronic condition. People living with any chronic condition tend to have some difficulties with their immune system. So that can be a challenge getting through the day-to-day. And so now we're kind of all having a little bit of a taste of that, even though we can still breathe. So it's not exactly the same thing at all. So let's see, I just had to clear out something real quick there. Apologies. And John kind of came to that realization too, that he wants people to continue to be successful. So one of the things he mentions is, of course, actually staying home during stay-at-home orders. It says just stay at home whenever possible. I'm finding it a good time to catch up on the many to-dos that are getting put on the back burner, which I can appreciate as well. While I await the surge hiring and stuff like that, depending on trying to see exactly what's going to be happening with my workload coming up here, trying to take advantage of the time I have to, again, share some of this information, catch up on some projects, having a little bit of extra family time and that sort of thing. Also, arrange in advance, arrange right now for friends and family to be able to run errands for you should that be necessary. And that's a great tip. I actually was speaking with a couple of patients who have mentioned they've been working with grandkids, children, all that sort of thing, to make sure that they have all this stuff covered, to make sure that they have medications, groceries, all of these things covered. So that these folks don't have to be going out into the wild, basically, and into the high-risk zones where we can see a lot of this coronavirus transmission. As John mentions, this will get worse and it may be unsafe for you to leave your home, period. And that is very true. Most of the projections we're seeing tell us that the next 2 weeks or so are probably going to be very rough. I know we're seeing, we're still in Michigan, we're still in kind of what we call the steep part of the curve, where we're seeing cases kind of escalate significantly each day. We're still trying to flatten that, and there is some hope that the social isolation or the physical isolation, trying to avoid the social word because we still want to maintain that social connection. But we're seeing some of that isolation actually being successful in limiting some of the more dire projections, but this is still going to probably get worse for a lot of areas. You don't want to put others at risk, but it may be a little bit safer for someone like me to go do stuff than someone living with COPD, particularly if you're on oxygen or if you are like Jim and has had lung transplant and is immunosuppressed. I'm just catching now. Jim, I was looking for what the actual definition of efforts was. This information that I'm reading right now comes from a post John Linnell did that was shared through Efforts, and I want to encourage people to either go to his page or to the Efforts site, the Efforts Facebook page to get that covered. I want to give him full credit and make sure that that's going out appropriately. And couldn't quite remember what Efforts stood for, so. So moving on to the next item on here, when possible, order refills of medication you may be taking, particularly inhalers. And this is pretty important because we're seeing supply chain disruptions of everything, including inhalers. We're still seeing some reported shortages of things like albuterol inhalers, different brands of them. So we want to make sure that the folks who need that the most are stocked up. And again, you don't necessarily want to be going out during the worst times that are coming up in the next couple of weeks here. We want to make sure that you've got all that stuff prepared appropriately. Now, I won't necessarily say go over the edge and do things like the hoarding of toilet paper. That's still kind of an issue out there. We're still seeing a lot of issue locally, seeing a lot of things. I went out to the grocery store recently within the last couple of days, and we're still seeing shortages and purchase restrictions and things like that. So don't necessarily hoard, but make sure you're stocked up to get yourself through the next month or 6 weeks or so, particularly with things like medications, other supplies, things like that. Stay active. This was another conversation I've been having. You don't want to go to a gym, or as we mentioned, pulmonary rehabs are closed, that sort of thing. Here in Kalamazoo, John, thank you. You've joined in. Emphysema for our right to survive. So that is what EFFORT stands for. And John, again, thank you for checking in today. This is your list. Again, John Linnell, everybody giving him full credit. These are fantastic tips that I just want everybody to be aware of in case you haven't seen these yet or aren't able to locate them easily. Staying active, absolutely critically important, particularly when you don't necessarily have your normal routes of activity. If you can't get to your pulmonary rehab, you can't get to your gym, you can't get to Silver Sneakers or any of these things. Again, in Kalamazoo, we've had trouble not following social distance or physical distance recommendations, and so we just had to close down all of our public parks, our public parks. And that's a real issue because that's where a lot of people can go for some easy exercise. And again, it's not a place where, they had closed down the playgrounds and things like that because we didn't want contact on surfaces and things like that. But the parks were a great place to go to get exercise in fresh air and things like that. And so if those things are getting closed, it's a real issue. And so, but even activity around the house, walking around the yard, walking around the block, making sure you're staying 6 feet away from folks. These are all things that are going to be not only important for your physical health, but your mental well-being. And we're going to get to that in the next article I wanted to highlight. But physical and mental health go hand in hand, especially in a case like this, where we have so many unknowns, we have so many stressors, where we're having so many issues. Okay, so John's mentioning you can only see half the screen. Don't know exactly what's going on there, but in any event, where we're having so many of these issues, we've got to make sure you're taking care of your mental health as well. And activity, particularly on a nice day, it's starting to warm up a little bit. That's going to be fantastic for mental health purposes. Again, John is the one who has mentioned physical distancing rather than the phrase social distancing. We want to maintain that social connection. That's why we're trying to do things like this. And I encourage anybody to drop stories and things like that we can share with each other. I'm working on some kind of idea where maybe we can do some kind of interactive chat where we can actually have a social experience while maintaining some safety. Been hearing some horror stories and seeing them. I know one of our local city commission meetings tried to go online with a teleconference platform and got bombed by trolls and with a lot of inappropriate images and words and all that stuff. So make sure that you're staying apart physically from each other, but keeping that social mental connection. consider some things like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, those sort of things. Again, we tie a lot of that in together with breathing and breathing techniques, mindful breathing and things like that. Again, helping to get recentered. There's a lot of bad news out there. The media is a great source of bad news and good and bad information, but even sometimes the good information is bad news. So we've got to make sure that you maintain that centeredness. And again, with the quarantines and things like that, it's also very easy to get isolated and depressed from that. So looking at maintaining a schedule, I know that's something that I have had seen some struggles with in myself, with my wife, with my daughter. Without some of the formal, rigid structures of the 9 to 5 normal environment, it can be tough, but and you can really get confused about what day it is. It kind of reminds me of my night shift days again, where we just kind of keep cycling through the same kind of day. That's been the really nice thing about some of the nice weather we've been experiencing, is that has kind of broken that a little bit. With the gray days, it's really hard to tell one day to another, but now we've had some sunlight and a little bit more variation there. Peer support groups on social media. Of course, as I mentioned, we have COPD Navigator on Facebook, the COPD Foundation, as John mentions in his work here. They have a fantastic site called COPD 360 Social. There are now dozens of other support groups that are out there. One of the key components, in our group, we try to focus a lot on the clinical education as well as some of the social aspects, but you got to get those peer connections, those people walking the same path. Those are critically important, again, not only to physical well-being and tips and tricks and things like that, but to have that bonding connection that we see a lot in pulmonary rehab that are so critically important. Got to get that too. And of course, John points out this is still a great time for advocacy. As I mentioned earlier, he and I are both in the U.S. COPD Coalition, and we are right now fighting to get Medicare to do a lot of things that have needed to be done for a long time, whether it's improve the reimbursement for oxygen so that we can practice what we preach, and when we tell people to get out of the house, they don't necessarily have to drag around a huge oxygen tank. They can have a more portable liquid system that is easier to transport, whether it's improved access to respiratory care services, telehealth. If you're watching this, I hope you're a believer in the idea that by having these connections, by having these interactions remotely, we can keep people who are at risk safe. We as clinicians can keep ourselves safe. We can provide these services and this education in a relatively efficient manner. If we had two-way communication, I could sit here and look and watch your breathing, see how strongly you're coughing. We can do a lot of those interactions. We may be somewhat limited with technology right now. I might not be able to watch your oxygen level or listen to your lungs, but those days are coming. And we need to make sure that if we want to see people and care for them as efficiently as possible and as safely as possible, we have to make sure we're providing the tools for that. And that's where telehealth comes into play. So I'll continue to advocate for that by doing things like spreading the word about social advocacy groups like Navigator, like COPD 360 Social, like the Coalition. Joining us, oftentimes we'll have a call for signees for petitions and advocacy letters and things like that. We need the support of the entire community. So if you can help share that message, you're doing everybody a favor in the community. If you're a member of that community, you're doing yourself a favor. You're doing respiratory therapists a favor, nurses, physicians, so many other people. We're trying to get things together so that we in the clinical side can do a better job of taking care of the COPD community. Because I can tell you, one of the reasons I got involved was because I saw an opportunity for improvement. And once I got into the community, I saw how desperately it was needed. It was even worse than I thought. On the clinical side, we've neglected the community for such a long time, and I hope to be a part of that change, particularly with your help. So hopefully I can encourage you to be a part of the change there and get involved with some of that stuff. Jim and Mary mentioned right now, our daughter's a psychotherapist in Colorado operating strictly through telehealth. And yeah, that is a challenge that a lot of folks are facing right now. Telehealth is a fantastic tool for a pandemic because this is how we can continue to provide support safely, not putting people, I mean, we just went through a whole thing where we're telling people to stay at home and protect themselves, but you have to come to my office and sit in the waiting room full of other sick people. That doesn't make any sense. So let's use the tools that we have and the tools that are coming down the pipeline to provide a better experience for everybody. So again, thank you very much, John, for putting that together. I encourage everybody to go check out the efforts page. Emphysema Foundation for Our Right to Survive. Check out John's page. Follow us there, either there at the COPD Coalition. Follow the COPD Foundation. Follow all these things so that we can get people advocating and all speaking from the same, singing from the same choir book, I believe the phrase is. So let's see, I'm going to circle back around real quick. We're going to look at a couple of different places before I get into my next the next topic. Going through in some of the comments here, I want to say hello to Elizabeth Jane, calling in from Canada, or watching in, signing in, logging in, whatever the right terminology is, from Canada. Thank you very much for joining in. And John also wants me to make sure to highlight that in this article, he has a fantastic chocolate ganache tart recipe from Bon Appetit. He says, don't let that scare you. It's easy but rich. I got to tell you, Bon Appetit is one of my favorite things right now. Again, if you're watching this and if you have any interest at all in cooking, go check out some of the Bon Appetit videos that are out there on YouTube. They have a lot of different things. They have virtually every different kind of topic, from amateur cooks all the way up to gourmet chefs. They have some great stories. They have one in particular that's a family favorite called Gourmet Makes, where Claire is a gourmet chef and she breaks down common things like Kit Kat bars. I'm blanking on some of the other ones. She breaks down common things you can commonly buy in the store and figures out how to make them in homemade versions that are very similar to the original recipe. So you see all the frustration that goes into it, all the iteration, all of these experiments that go on. It's a great show. Check that out. Check out Brad. Brad Leone does a lot of great things. Fantastic group of people. So let's see. I want to check out here. So this other article that I mentioned is from was shared by another longtime supporter of Navigator, Octavia. Octavia does a great job. Trying to find, she had a great where to go? Had a great here we go. So she points out a lot. This is something that she shared on her page earlier that I thought was very, very helpful, very appropriate for these kind of times. Saying seeing a lot of nasty posts in regard to people making non-essential trips. You know, of course, we're trying to get people to do all the essentials at home, or we're talking about essential employees and all that stuff. And this post goes on to say, do you ever think that maybe that guy buying a gallon of paint knows he must keep busy because idle hands in the past have caused him to relapse and pick up a case of beer? So he's using this time to do home improvement, something that keeps his mind busy while feeling a sense of accomplishment, while trying to avoid painful triggers, possibly even alone. Maybe that lady buying bags of soil and seeds have struggled with depression and suicide. How do you know that planting and watching something beautiful grow during this time of darkness isn't essential to her and holding on to what little hope she might still have? We need to remember that it is impossible to know just by looking at a situation from our small lens what someone is truly going through or where their mental health is. Everyone handles chaos and healing through different means, and I know we're all on edge, but please stop being judgmental of others. # mental health is number one. So this brings up some fantastic points about not only where we are in the here and now during this pandemic, but where we are outside of this immediate crisis. We are very quick to judge, especially in the COPD world. And I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want to phrase this, but we see a lot of times that people have they look down on folks in the COPD world, not even just because since COPD isn't one of those things that you can see visibly very well. It's easy to think that, oh, that person must just be faking it, or they're lazy, or something like that. It's difficult to understand that. It's difficult to see shortness of breath unless it's actually happening, unless you have somebody huffing and puffing and all that stuff. But when you have somebody who's lived with COPD for a long time, they know what their triggers are. They know what is going to make them short of breath, and it's human nature to often tend to avoid those activities. So we have to be very careful inside a pandemic or out that our essential isn't always what somebody else's essential is. Our perspective doesn't always align with what other people's perspectives are. And we have to be careful that we're not passing invalid, unfortunate, untoward judgments toward other people. Again, this happens a lot right now in the world of COVID. And of course, it happens frequently in the world of COPD as well. So I want to thank Octavia for sharing that. I don't know what the original source of this was, but I do think this was a fantastic thing. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean make an excuse or go out and just do it and say, well, not to rationalize, but again, just to make sure that you're not overgeneralizing and make sure that you understand that your essential might not be the same as somebody else's essential. That said, if it is truly an unessential thing, please, please, please try and avoid it. So, not to be too both-sidery about that, but Kelly Becker signing in. For those of you who may not know, Kelly Becker is my beloved wife. Also highlighting my nails, courtesy of my daughter Emma. So I appreciate that. Shout out to Hollow Taco for the nails that are getting me through a relatively dark time right now. It's tough for everybody right now, seeing friends that are dealing on the front lines, looking at not enough personal protective equipment, too many patients, not enough ventilators, too much stress. And especially in the face of this is likely to get a little bit worse before we start looking at it getting any better. So taking what we can, getting through the day here. So yeah. So that said, let's see what kind of questions we've got coming through. Who's got some additional questions, whether they're COPD related, COVID related? Let's see, what is on the mind of the Navigator community right now? Who's got, give me a good story we can tell. I shared a couple of things already from some of our advocates here. I would love to share some other stories that tell me how you're coping with a lot of this stuff. Tell me how, what's going on in your corner of the world. What are some tips that you're having right now? What's on your mind? Let's see. What else is going on? One thing that we've been looking at a little bit is a quick cycle through if there's any updates in the world of COPD research. We've mentioned a couple of times that even though this is often a prime time we're a couple of weeks away from we were a couple of weeks away from the American Thoracic Society conference, which is usually a hotbed of research, but that has been postponed. Okay, well, here's one from 5 hours ago. How about that? Pulmonary Advisor tells us that high flow nasal therapy improves dyspnea in, go away, paywall, High flow nasal therapy improves dyspnea in acute COPD exacerbation. So what we're looking at here is a thing called high flow nasal oxygen, that where you actually get, many of you are familiar with the idea of supplemental oxygen through a standard nasal cannula that kind of goes through your nose like that, anywhere from 1 to about 6 liters. High flow is, as you might expect, a little bit different. This is a bigger cannula. It's a little bit more reminiscent of like a CPAP nasal pillow or something like that, and delivers more along the lines of, in this study, they were doing 50 liters a minute, to more appropriately simulate what inspiratory flow is and give you a little bit more accurately controlled percentage of oxygen without putting a tube down your throat to help you breathe, or the big cumbersome mask of non-invasive ventilator and that sort of thing. So this is a study that was recently published in the Journal of Chronic Obstructive Pulmonary Disease. Single center, single arm, prospective. So this is a decent enough study. It's not the ideal, like randomized controlled, I don't believe. But what they did was they had people who were experiencing what we call acute respiratory failure, which is low oxygen, indications of you're not moving enough carbon dioxide, indications of poor gas exchange, we'll call it, having received maximum medical treatment. So this is when you go to the ER and you're on your prednisone drip or your steroid drip, you've gotten your breathing treatments, all that stuff. You've gotten up to, oh, this is in Italy, that's why it looks a little bit weird, up to 10 liters a minute of oxygen via a face mask, a simple mask. We still have some dyspnea scores and all that sort of thing. So they put people on at 50 liters a minute initially, and then titrated a little bit depending on how well it was tolerated and how severe the symptoms were, but they kept it at least 35 liters a minute, again, to kind of make sure that we're matching inspiratory flow and things like that. So we had 15 patients. After 24 hours, participants demonstrated significant improvements on the dyspnea scale. The respiratory rate went down from close to 30 down to about 23, which is good because the faster you breathe, the more easy it is for you to get tired, as many of you probably know. None of them required ventilatory support, either with an endotracheal tube or with a mask. So this is a little bit of a preliminary thing. The end footnote here is that the investigators concluded that because of the single arm design of this current study, the effect of high flow nasal therapy could not be isolated from the effects of standard medical treatment. So they can't say for sure that it was just that these patients would have gotten better anyway. It does tell us that more research is indicated because this is a potentially solid therapy. So some good news for potential indication. The last thing we want to do, particularly when we're dealing with the pandemic situation, is put somebody in a ventilator. So if we can avoid that, it's going to be a lot easier. So let's see what else we can get here. All right, so we're going to take another look at let's see. We got any other comments coming through right now? What's here we go. Russell Winwood, good day. That's my terrible Australian accent. Good day, mate. Russell checking in, the COPD athlete, another fantastic advocate for the COPD world. Check out his website, his Facebook page, all his good stuff. Watched a webinar yesterday from dietitians on the front line of COVID, another discipline that often goes overlooked. I have known some fantastic dietitians in my time in the outpatient and inpatient worlds. Absolutely essential, critical to making sure that our critical care patients, particularly those who are ventilated for any length of time, are appropriately managed. So, and Russell, one of his areas of extreme interest is diet, exercise, as you might expect from a COPD athlete. Um, severe cases have a pattern of high glucose levels, timely reminder to eat whole foods, and thoughts. Yes, absolutely. I think, we have seen as the information evolves on demographics, patient characteristics, all of these things, as the information evolves, we're seeing that maybe the cases in the US are a little bit different than we've seen in other parts of the world, because, not to get too soapboxy, but the Western diet, particularly here in America, is terrible. For a variety of reasons. And I can speak to this from both sides of the fence as a clinician and as someone who has struggled with poor nutrition myself. Those of you who have been with me for a while know that I used to weigh up around the 360-pound range. Through the help of people like Kelly, my wife, who's a nurse practitioner working in metabolic medicine, following the example of a lot of people in the COPD community to get healthy and practice what I preach, been able to overcome a lot of that stuff. But I can safely say that our diet, our standard diet, is pretty terrible. And so we have a significant problem with obesity in the US. Now, that leads to a host of other issues where we're talking about inflammatory characteristics, we're talking about the physical problems of trying to ventilate somebody with a large abdomen or with a heavy chest wall, because these are where fat deposits are. So we're having a lot of complications with that in the COVID area. And I'm seeing, while I'm not actively in the ICUs at this point yet, I'm hearing from a lot of ICU folks that obesity, diabetes, the things that go along with that, including the cardiac things, are also a huge risk factor for severe COVID disease. So I wholeheartedly agree that we need to be eating better in order to help protect ourselves, not only against COVID, but against a lot of these other issues too. So yes, I wholeheartly, I don't know exactly what the dietitian said. I would be interested to catch a summary of that webinar at some point if I can. But yes, I would agree that high blood glucose is probably a pretty common risk factor for the more severe forms of the disease, where you're going to be in the hospital, where you're going to end up on the ventilator, and where you have maybe a poor outcome with survival. Shoot, I was just going to say one other thing. I had it loaded up, and now severe cases, high blood glucose levels. Maybe it'll come back to me, but definitely seeing that same kind of deal. So, yeah, I guess it's not coming back to me. Maybe I'll think of it. I don't know. But yes, we definitely are seeing that. I think it is definitely a thing. Going to email me the slides. Thank you very much, Russell. Appreciate that. Be very interested to see what that goes on there. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of. Oh, I know what I was going to say. One of the biggest comorbid conditions, concurrent conditions, whatever we want to call it, one of the biggest things that goes along with COPD is diabetes, because it kind of makes sense. If you can't breathe, you're going to be less active. If you're going to be less active, oftentimes your diet doesn't necessarily change with that, especially since we have poor diet at baseline. In addition, if you're having trouble breathing at baseline, you may be going through all the hassle of shopping and preparing and all that stuff. And when it actually comes time to eat, you're too tired to eat. So you either have poor nutrition and lose weight, you don't have enough calories, you don't have enough protein, you don't have enough of those sort of things, or you start migrating toward the prepared foods that are heavily processed and have a lot of things that are bad for you in them. In either case, you're going to be at higher risk for complications, because if you're on the skinny end or cachectic end, you're not going to have as much reserve, you're not going to have enough muscle mass, and you're not going to be able to deal with insults like COVID very well. If you're on the other side of things, where you're struggling with the overweight, the body mass issues, then you run into these inflammatory problems and the diabetes and the cardiac issues. So yes, it is quite conflicted in a lot of different ways. Sugar itself is pro-inflammatory. Kelly, as I mentioned, far more knowledgeable and experienced than I. We should probably get together and do maybe a joint thing at some point about whether it's in the context of COVID or whether it's just chronic nutrition in general. Should be chatting about some of this stuff a little bit more anyway. So I'll send that message literally upstairs to the wife up there. So. Because she can speak far more intelligently than I on a lot of these issues when it comes to nutrition. So thanks, Russell, for bringing that up. I appreciate that input. Let's see what else we got going on here. So actually, when I was looking through some of this other stuff, another thing that comes from 5 hours ago, another also thing that comes from Pulmonology Advisor. So what we're looking at here on this topic, as a matter of fact, lifestyle program pilot tested for obese patients or obese individuals with COPD-linked dyspnea. So this was just published in Chest, which is one of the premier respiratory journals in the U.S. It's the Journal of the American College of Chest Physicians. I'm curious to see if their annual conference will go on. As that is in Chicago, that's later on in the year, so that might be a good thing. We're going to see. So this study looked at an 8-week lifestyle program, pilot program, to evaluate its effectiveness in improving dyspnea, eating awareness, and overall quality of life in patients with COPD and obesity. These were folks who were recruited from pulmonary outpatient practice of the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So, John, if you're still watching, this might be something that you are aware of. So what they did, they had people who are older than 17 with a body mass index of 34 or greater, dyspnea greater than an MMRC class of 2, which translates probably to about a 10 or greater on the COPD assessment test. Diagnosis of chronic lung disease. I haven't looked into whether this was spirometry or not, but what they did was an 8-week intervention that had weekly telephone coaching, use of the Weight Watchers online program, which I have thoughts on Weight Watchers, but that's okay. The use of a Garmin Vivo Fit wristband, so kind of like a Fitbit fitness tracker, a DVD with mindfulness-based movement. So going back to this full circle here to the stuff that John's article is talking about with the mindfulness. On a Bluetooth smart scale for at-home weigh-in. So, and again, another full circle. We're talking about telehealth again. The participants agreed to record all food they ate at least twice daily in the Weight Watchers app, and now I will agree that food journaling is an essential intervention there. Wearing the wristband to capture their daily steps and weighing themselves at least once per week. So they found 19 patients, ended up recruiting 14 of them. Most were women, most were married. Okay. The mean age was 67 years old. Mean body weight was 263.4 pounds with a mean body mass index of 43. Most patients had a diagnosis of COPD. One patient had asthma. One patient had sarcoidosis. So they on average weighed themselves 8.9 times, watched the videos an average of 14.2 times, and logged food on an average of 40 of a possible 56 days. 14 ended up participating, 13 completed, one person discontinued for personal reasons. The average weight loss was 9.3 pounds, corresponding to an average weekly weight loss of 1.2 pounds. Now, 10 pounds doesn't always sound like a big deal, but when you lose at least, I believe it's, and again, this is where I might call in the wife on this, but if you lose at least 5% of your body mass, that can make a tremendous deal. So, or a tremendous impact. It's literally the first step. So if we're talking about an average of 263 pounds, 10% would be 26 pounds, 5% would be 13 pounds-ish. So we've got a mean average weight loss of almost that 5%. So we're seeing a pretty significant lifestyle impact there. Again, by kind of low-hanging fruit, encouragement with the app, encouragement with the weight tracker, some mindfulness stuff, and food journaling. Mean decrease in body mass index of 1.5, mean percentage of body fat loss of 1.8%. Again, Kelly might tell you a little bit more if that how relevant that is. On the COPD side of things, we saw an increase in the 6-minute walk distance of 117 feet, which is pretty significant. All domains on the chronic respiratory questionnaire improved, as did summaries on the physical and emotional aspects. So basically what we're looking at here, long story short, if you lose a little bit of weight, you're going to improve your breathing too. I can tell you without COPD, it helped me improve my endurance and things like that. I can play tennis now. I can go we just went for a walk today, carrying things around, we're doing these activities. So I would have to imagine in the COPD world, it's also going to improve your dyspnea for a couple of different reasons. Just the basic mechanics of it, of not having to fight against that abdominal mass when you're using your diaphragm, not physically carrying around as much weight, so you don't have to work as hard. And again, the inflammation aspects of things. And Jim, and I wondered if Jim might weigh in on this. The value of keeping daily vital sign logs, activity levels, and symptoms, also a very big deal. Of course, we're talking here specifically toward weight loss, but I know Jim has been an avid tracker of a lot of different things. He's got a personal spirometer that can help look at trends. In the asthma world, we talk about peak flow meters and things like that. We use that all the time. Less so in COPD as far as peak flow, but we haven't necessarily had the technology to do things like FEV1, but those are coming out. I know Jim's tracked that a lot. Pulse oxes. Shoot, where'd my pulse ox go? I actually have a pulse ox that I have been apparently irresponsible with and put it in a baggie that I have misplaced. So go me for being a responsible adult. Oh, here it is. So this is... Turns out I was more responsible than I thought. I'm just not used to that in myself. So, these things, this one is a little bit on the higher end of things, and I can connect it to my phone and do all that sort of thing. But simply tracking your oxygen levels, that can be an indicator of potential onset of illness. You have to be mindful that you're using it properly. Just like we talk about masks, we talk about gloves. Yes, all these things can help, but you also have to be using them properly and understand the context with which you're using them. So, and tools like this are just the same. So, if you have a lower cost one that is maybe more susceptible to what we call artifacts, if you're swinging your arms around, or if you have the fancy nails and you get a little bit different reflection, you just have to be mindful of that. Again, it's not necessarily saying that it doesn't work or anything like that. Just be aware of some of these other factors. Under the bologna sandwich. No, it's actually under. I'm going to let my sci-fi, in case you can't tell my sci-fi nature. I have a model of the USS Defiant from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which was cloaking my my pulse ox. So we'll keep that nearby. We're going to keep the pulse ox at the ready from now on. So tracking all these things, getting back to the actual matter at hand, tracking all these things can be an invaluable tool when you're managing your symptoms, because it helps identify triggers. It helps identify trends, whether you actually have more difficulty breathing at night, or if you're in certain locations, or even when we go long term, are we looking at seasonal differences? All of these things can help you and your clinical team figure out your best treatment plan. One thing I also want to throw out there, Russell did point out a couple of minutes ago, MyFitnessPal is a great app. The study that we were talking about used the Weight Watchers app. I have used. I would advocate for something along the lines of MyFitnessPal. It is a better tool in my opinion. It is a solid tool. I know in Kelly's practice they use another app called Berrytastic that helps with food journaling. These apps are great because they do a lot of the math and the hard work for you and help you track things like your protein intake, your carb intake, your fat intake, as well as overall calories. They're easy to use. They have barcode scanners, so if you happen to buy some prepared food, you can usually scan that stuff in. They have menus built in many times for if you go out to a restaurant. You can add your own recipes, and it will do some of the math for you. So a lot of things. MyFitnessPal is definitely an excellent tool for a lot of that, and there are a couple of different ones. Kim Kendall, a friend of mine checking in, a coworker checking in. Appreciate your words of support there. Definitely, I definitely could not do this on my own. Emma does a great job with my nails. I appreciate it though. Again, it's kind of one of those coping skills to get in there, and have some fun with it. So, kind of a fun thing. We got a few more minutes left. I know we had a little bit of a late start today, so I'm going to stick around a little bit later. I am curious for those folks who are sticking around with me, if perhaps a later show might be of some interest to folks. Tomorrow is the day we usually do our Breathe TV, our bi-weekly show that has a little bit more of a formalized lesson plan. I'm actually not sure what format that's going to look like right now. We've got some topics in mind, but as I've mentioned, not seeing a lot of breaking news right now. So, and what we are seeing kind of comes through with these shows. So I haven't 100% decided what that's going to look like tomorrow. And I'm also curious if maybe, like I said, a later show might be of benefit. We used to do these around noontime, and it seems like the earlier afternoon shows do seem to have a little bit better reception, just because this is a little bit more time through the whole part of the country is, well, not to be too Amerocentric about it, but does seem to be a little bit more practical for North America, and maybe a little bit of points continuing on west. But let me know. Drop a note in the comments. Let me know. Send me a tweet, something like that. Let me know if a later show might be a benefit. Maybe I'll just pop on there and see what kind of attention, what trouble we can get into anyway, just out of curiosity. But so look for that in the coming days. Right now, we're going to continue on with our 4 o'clock shows. Not seeing a lot of additional questions coming in, so Nutrition with Mike and Kelly Becker does seem like a timely episode. Would certainly agree with that. Maybe we'll see if we can, I don't know if we can pull that together quite for tomorrow, but we might be able to get something together by the end of the week for everybody. Taking a little bit deeper dive into the world of nutrition and chronic condition management. So if you have other ideas for some topics you'd like to see or other videos you'd like to see, please let me know. Again, this is a service that we're trying to get out there. The other thing that would really tremendously help is, I hate to be that guy, but if you can help share these videos, if you can go to our Facebook page, it's all you have to do is go to Facebook and search COPD Navigator, Twitter and search for COPD Navigator, or YouTube and search for COPD Navigator. Find our channel with the neon lighthouse and simply just share that. Subscribe to it, share it, so that other people can get the message out there. I know that's kind of a cliche in the world of YouTube right now, like, share, and subscribe. But the bigger the subscriber base is, the easier it is to get the ball rolling. It's kind of a butterfly effect or snowball effect, whatever we want to talk about. The more contribution we get, the easier it is to get it out to the wider audience. And at the end of the day, the overall mission is to get COPD knowledge out to everybody who needs it. Whether, again, it's on the clinical side, it's on the caregiver side, it's on the living with side, whatever it is, we got to get that information out there. So hopefully we can get some of that done. And if you would take just a moment to like, share, and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. So And of course, tell, if you know somebody who would benefit from this information, please share it with them too. Again, this is all free of charge kind of stuff, so we want to make sure that the best quality information is going out there. I am, of course, one channel for that. I encourage everybody to not just rely on one channel. So if you see some other information out there, share that with the group. Bring that in. We'll discuss it. We'll take a look at it. Make sure that. Make sure that nice. I believe that's a gift there. We're in this together. We certainly are, and we'll get. So Judy mentions 4 o'clock peak time of day. I don't know if that's a good peak or a bad peak, but like I said, we'll try a couple of different things, and we'll see what works. So. All that said, I appreciate everybody stopping by and spending some of your Tuesday with you. If you haven't gotten out to do your exercise yet, and you can, go walk around the block for a minute, or do some steps in your living room next time you get a commercial coming on TV. Find a favorite show, or find a YouTube thing, find something that you enjoy. Take 5 minutes, do some steps in place. Maybe grab a soup can or something like that and start lifting some of that stuff. Have some fun with it. Resistance bands, all kinds of stuff. Every little bit is going to help. Every little bit keeps you going forward and protecting everything that you've got. Jim, Joe, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate everybody stopping by. I appreciate, again, I know Jim was a new subscriber yesterday. Appreciate everybody stopping by. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Until tomorrow, again, my name is Mike Hess. This is COPD Navigator House Call. Take care. Breathe easy.